My name is Maya, and for 3 years, I was the pulse of Sterling Global. As the lead analyst, I didn't just track data, I predicted the future. I arrived at 6 a.m. every morning and left long after the cleaners had finished their rounds. I believed in the company. More importantly, I believed in my boss, Julian Sterling. Julian was charming, brilliant, and incredibly cruel. He was the son of the founder, a man who had been handed a kingdom and thought he had built it himself. I did his work, I fixed his mistakes, and I kept his secrets. On a rainy Tuesday, the air in the office felt heavy. Julian called me into his glass-walled office. He didn't ask me to sit. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Maya, we're restructuring," he said, his voice as cold as the rain hitting the window. "Your position is no longer required. You have 30 minutes to clear your desk." I felt the blood drain from my face. Restructuring? "Julian, I just finished the quarterly merger report. I saved the firm $6 million this month alone." He finally looked at me, a small, arrogant smile playing on his lips. "The firm saved that money, Maya. You were just the tool I used to do it. And honestly, you're becoming a bit too expensive. My new assistant starts tomorrow. She's younger, faster, and, let's just say, more pleasant to look at." The disrespect felt like a physical blow. He wasn't firing me because of my work. He was firing me because he was bored of my competence and wanted someone he could control more easily. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked out of that glass box, feeling the eyes of my coworkers on my back. I packed my small plant, my favorite pen, and 3 years of my life into a cardboard box. As I reached the elevator, I saw Julian laughing with a tall, blonde woman in the hallway. He didn't even give me a second glance. I stood in the rain outside the skyscraper, my box getting soaked. I looked up at the 40th floor. I whispered to the wind, "You think you took everything from me, Julian, but you just gave me the freedom to take everything from you." I didn't go home. I went to a quiet, high-end hotel bar, the kind of place where the powerful men of the city went to hide. I ordered a glass of expensive scotch, sat in a dark corner, and waited. I knew exactly who was coming through those doors at 5:30 p.m. I was waiting for Arthur Sterling, Julian's father, the man who actually owned the empire. Arthur Sterling was a man of habit. Every Tuesday after the markets closed, he came to this specific bar. He didn't come for the alcohol, he came for the silence. While his son, Julian, loved the spotlight and the noise of expensive parties, Arthur was a man of shadows and deep thoughts. I watched him enter. He moved with a slow, heavy confidence. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my yearly salary at the firm. He sat at the bar, 3 seats away from me. "A double Macallan, neat," he said to the bartender. His voice was like low thunder, deep and gravelly. I waited 5 minutes. Then I intentionally dropped my pen. It rolled across the polished floor and stopped right at the toe of his leather shoe. He leaned down, picked it up with a surprisingly steady hand for a man in his late 60s, and turned toward me. Our eyes met. I made sure mine looked slightly red, as if I had been crying, but I kept my chin up. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, holding out the pen. He noticed the logo on the side, Sterling Global Lead Analyst. "Thank you," I whispered, taking it. I reached for my drink, but my hand trembled just enough for him to notice. Arthur narrowed his eyes. He was a predator. He could smell blood in the water. "You work for my son's firm. Why are you sitting in a dark bar on a Tuesday afternoon with your life packed into a box? I took a slow sip of my scotch. I worked for the firm, Mr. Sterling, until an hour ago. It seems I was too expensive and not pleasant enough to look at. I saw a flash of genuine irritation cross his face. Arthur had built Sterling Global on hard work and loyalty. He hated Julian's laziness. Julian always was a fool for shiny new things, Arthur grunted. He waved the bartender over. Another for the lady. Put it on my tab. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't tell him I was planning revenge. I told him about the $6 million I saved the company. I told him about the merger reports I wrote while Julian was out golfing. I spoke about the company with more passion than Julian ever had. You know more about my legacy than my own blood does, Arthur said, looking at me with a new kind of intensity. I loved that company, Arthur, I said, using his first name for the first time. I looked down at my glass. But Julian doesn't want experts. He wants ornaments. Arthur reached out and placed his hand over mine. His skin was rough, but his touch was firm. The board of directors is meeting in a month to discuss Julian's performance. I was going to let him fail on his own. But now, I think I'd like to see what happens if he has a real opponent. He pulled out a silver business card. Call me tomorrow. Not at the office, my private line. As I left the bar, the rain had stopped. I looked at the silver card in my hand. Part 1 was complete. I didn't just have an ally. I had the king. And the king was very, very lonely. The next morning, I didn't wake up to an alarm. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to rush to Julian's office with a double espresso and a stack of files. Instead, I sat on my small balcony, drank tea, and stared at the silver business card. At exactly 10 a.m., I called the private line. Sterling, the voice crackled. It was deep, commanding, and expectant. It's Maya, I said, my voice steady. You told me to call. There was a brief silence, then a low hum of approval. I'm at my estate in the countryside. There's a car waiting for you downstairs. Don't pack a bag for just a day, pack for a week. The car was a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver didn't speak. We drove away from the glass skyscrapers of the city and toward the rolling green hills of the north. We pulled up to a gate that looked like it belonged to a fortress. Beyond it sat a mansion made of gray stone and ivy. Arthur was waiting for me in a library that smelled of old leather and expensive tobacco. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a heavy wool sweater. He looked less like a CEO and more like a king in exile. Julian called me this morning, Arthur said, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. He was laughing. He told me he finally trimmed the fat at the office. He has no idea he just threw away the engine of his company. I sat across from him. He thinks I'm gone, Arthur. He thinks I'm looking for a job at a mid-level firm, crying over my resume. Let him think that, Arthur said, his eyes gleaming. While he plays with his new toys, you and I are going to look at the real books, the ones Julian doesn't know exist. He's been stealing from the pension fund to cover his gambling debts in Macau. I knew it was happening, but I couldn't prove it without an analyst I could trust. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was bigger than just getting my job back. This was a total takeover. If I find the proof, I asked, what happens to him? Arthur walked over to the window, looking out at his vast lands. He will be removed from the board. He will lose his shares. He will be left with nothing but the name Sterling and no money to back it up. He turned back to me, a strange, soft expression on his face. But a company needs a face. It needs someone the board respects. I'm old, Maya. I'm tired of the fight. I need a partner. Someone who knows the soul of the business. He stepped closer. The age gap was clear, the silver hair, the lined face, but the power he radiated was intoxicating. Stay here. Work with me. Let's take back what he stole. That night, I stayed in a guest room that was larger than my entire apartment. I realized that the best revenge wasn't just making Julian lose. It was taking his place. I wasn't just going to be an employee anymore. I was going to be the woman who owned the desk Julian sat at. The week at Arthur's estate passed in a blur of spreadsheets, hidden ledgers, and late-night strategy sessions. While Julian was likely enjoying long lunches and firing more expensive employees, Arthur and I were digging into the cracks of his empire. Arthur gave me access to the master ledger, a digital vault that only the founder could open. As I scanned the numbers, my eyes widened. Julian wasn't just lazy, he was desperate. Arthur, look at this, I said, pointing to a series of transfers to a shell company called Crown Acquisitions. He's been siphoning off 5% of every construction contract for the last 18 months. He's not just gambling his own money, he's stealing the company's future. Arthur sat back in his chair, his face hardening into a mask of granite. I gave him everything. I gave him the best education, the best mentors, and a seat at the head of the table, and he chose to be a thief. He thought no one was watching, I whispered. He thought I was just a tool, remember? He forgot that tools see how the machine works. We worked until 2 a.m. The library was quiet, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock and the crackle of the fireplace. The atmosphere between us began to shift. It was no longer just a boss and an ex-employee. We were partners in a secret war. When I finally closed my laptop, Arthur reached over and covered my hand with his. His grip was warm and steady. You're a remarkable woman, Maya, he said softly. Julian was right about one thing. You are expensive. But he failed to realize you are worth every cent. You have the mind of a CEO and the heart of a lion. I looked into his eyes. There was a loneliness there that mirrored my own. I had spent my life working for a dream that wasn't mine. He had spent his life building a dream for a son who didn't care. I don't want a job back at the firm, Arthur, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't want to be an analyst anymore. I know, he replied. He leaned closer, the scent of expensive tobacco and rain-washed cedar surrounding me. The board needs stability. They need a Sterling. But I'm too old to lead alone, and Julian is a ghost. If you were more than an employee, the board couldn't touch you. You would be family. You would be an owner. The air in the room felt electric. The revenge was evolving. It wasn't just about taking Julian's job. It was about taking his name, his inheritance, and his father. Are you suggesting what I think you are? I asked. Arthur smiled a slow, dangerous smile. I'm suggesting that Julian needs a new mother, and the company needs a new queen. The wedding was not a grand affair with hundreds of guests and flashing cameras. That would have alerted Julian too soon. Instead, it was a quiet legal ceremony in the sun-drenched conservatory of Arthur's estate. I wore a simple, cream-colored silk suit. Arthur looked regal in a dark tuxedo. As we signed the papers, the ink felt like a seal on Julian's fate. I was no longer Maya, the fired analyst. I was Maya Sterling, the wife of the chairman and a primary shareholder of Sterling Global. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling," Arthur whispered, kissing my hand. His eyes weren't just cold and calculating anymore. There was a genuine spark of warmth. "Now, shall we go collect our wedding gift?" The gift was the monthly board meeting held at the skyscraper in the city. Julian was at the head of the table when we arrived. He was leaning back, feet on the desk, laughing with his new assistant. He looked like a man who thought he had already won the game of life. "Father," Julian said, standing up with a fake smile. "What a surprise. I didn't know you were coming into the city today, and—" "Maya?" He looked at me, his smile fading into a sneer. "I thought I told you to stay out of this building. Security! Why is this former employee in my boardroom?" Arthur stepped forward, his cane hitting the marble floor with a sharp clack. The room went silent. The other board members looked uncomfortable. "She isn't a former employee, Julian," Arthur said, his voice echoing. "She is the newest member of the board of directors, and she is your stepmother." Julian's face turned a strange shade of gray. His jaw literally dropped. "Stepmother? Father, have you lost your mind? She's a gold digger. She's younger than I am." "She is the woman who saved this company while you were busy gambling," Arthur countered. He signaled to me. I walked to the head of the table. I didn't wait for Julian to move. I stood right behind his chair. I opened my laptop and projected the hidden ledgers, the shell companies, the stolen pension funds, and the Macau debts onto the giant screens on the wall. "Julian Sterling," I said, my voice calm and professional. "According to Article 4 of the corporate bylaws, theft from the employee pension fund is grounds for immediate termination of all shares and removal from the company." The board members began to whisper loudly. Julian looked at the screen, then at his father, then at me. The arrogant man who had fired me in the rain was now shaking. "You can't do this," Julian hissed. "I already did," I replied. "Security is waiting outside, but they aren't here for me. They are here to escort you out. You have 30 minutes to clear your desk, Julian, and this time, try not to get your box wet." The silence in the boardroom was heavy. Julian stood frozen, his eyes darting between the digital evidence of his crimes and the stone-faced board members who used to laugh at his jokes. For the first time in his life, his name could not save him. "This is a mistake!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "My father is old, he's confused. Maya is manipulating him." Arthur didn't even look up from his notepad. "I have never been sharper, Julian, and Maya hasn't manipulated me. She has awakened me. I was asleep while you were burning my legacy. Now please leave. You are making a scene." Security entered the room. They were the same guards Julian had treated like furniture for years. They took him by the arms. As they led him toward the door, he looked back at me. The hatred in his eyes was intense, but underneath it I saw something else. Fear. He had no money, no job, and no allies. I sat down in the chair at the head of the table. It was still warm from where he had been sitting. I took a deep breath and looked at the board members. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and authoritative, "we have a lot of work to do. The pension fund must be restored immediately. I have already drafted a plan to liquidate Julian's personal assets to cover the debt. We are going to turn Sterling Global back into a company of integrity." The next few months were a whirlwind. I worked harder than I ever had as an analyst. But now, I wasn't doing it for a paycheck. I was doing it for my company. Arthur stayed by my side, acting as my advisor. We spent our evenings in the library, but we didn't talk about spreadsheets anymore. We talked about life, art, and the future. One evening, Arthur handed me a glass of wine. You know, Maya, I married you to save the company, but I think you ended up saving me too. I was waiting to die in this big, empty house. Now I feel like I'm just starting. I realized then that my revenge had transformed. It started as a way to hurt Julian, but it ended as a way to heal myself and Arthur. I had power, I had wealth, and unexpectedly, I had a partner who truly respected me. As for Julian, last I heard he was working as a junior clerk in a small firm across town. He has to take the bus to work. He has to report to a boss who doesn't care about his last name. Every morning he has to walk past the Sterling Global skyscraper and see my name on the door. My revenge was perfect because it wasn't just a moment. It was a new life. A year had passed since the day Julian was escorted out of the building. The company was thriving. Profits were up, and more importantly, the employees felt safe and valued. I had settled into my role as CEO, and Arthur and I had built a life of quiet, mutual respect. One Saturday morning, while I was organizing Arthur's old desk in the library, I found a small, hidden drawer. Inside was a single envelope addressed to me. It was in Arthur's handwriting, dated the night before our wedding. My heart raced as I opened it. To my dearest Maya. If you are reading this, it means you have succeeded. You are now the leader I always wanted my son to be. I have a confession. I didn't meet you by accident at that bar. I had been watching you for months. I saw how hard you worked while Julian played. I saw your brilliance, and I saw how he mistreated you. I knew he would fire you eventually. I waited for that moment because I knew you were the only person strong enough to help me save our legacy. I didn't just give you a chance at revenge. I gave myself a chance to leave my life's work in the hands of someone who actually deserves it. Thank you for choosing to say yes to a lonely old man. You aren't my revenge against my son. You are my apology to the world. With love and respect, Arthur. I sat in the chair and cried. I realized that my perfect revenge was actually a perfect plan created by a father who loved his company more than his son's bad behavior. Arthur hadn't been a victim of my manipulation. He had been the architect of my freedom. That afternoon, I went to Arthur. He was in the garden, looking at the roses. I didn't mention the letter. I simply walked up to him and took his hand. Are you happy, Maya? He asked, looking at the sunset. I am more than happy, Arthur, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. I am home. Across the city, Julian sat in his small gray cubicle. He looked at the clock, waiting for his 15-minute break. He reached into his pocket and found a single quarter, 25 cents. He looked at it and remembered the millions he used to throw away. He sighed and went back to work. The story was over. The waitress of the corporate world was now the queen, and the prince was just another worker in the rain. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to Storyline English. See you next time.